My name is Brian Davis. I'm the Associate Director of Lifelong Learning in the Office of Alumni Relations at Johns Hopkins University. Thank you for joining this evening's Hopkins Founders Forum, Venture Capital, Securing Funding, Pursuing a Career, or Building a Network. I will now pass it to my collaborators.
I'm Julie Kelly. I'm the Senior Associate Director of Innovation Initiatives within the Development and Alumni Relations Department. I spearhead philanthropic initiatives and programming in partnership with Johns Hopkins Tech Ventures, and work very closely with my colleague Josh Ambrose, who's the Director of Student Ventures at Fast Forward U. And I will pass it on to you, Josh.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie. And thank you everyone for joining us. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I know we have a lot more guests that'll be jumping on in the next few minutes. So thanks for being here. But in my role as the Director of Student Ventures here at Fast Forward U, I get to oversee a number of different accelerator programs throughout the year. We're currently at a whopping 6 different incubator and accelerator programs throughout the year that work with hundreds of students from all over campus. In fact, last year we connected with over 200 ventures from both the Hopkins campus, anywhere from undergrad to postdoc, and the greater Baltimore community. I'm throwing a couple links here in the chat, and I encourage folks to check that out at any point. But we support student entrepreneurs with funding, with mentorship, with co-working space, with that accelerator programming, resources around Baltimore, and lots of different things associated with helping increase their odds at startup success. As part of that, a lot of the work we do is to help prepare them for different funding options. And in light of that, could not be more thrilled for this conversation this evening, and super grateful for our panelists for joining us. As a reminder, today's event will be run both as a panel and also followed up by breakout rooms, where the audience will have a chance to connect further with our panelists in a smaller audience. So all of our guests, I encourage you to keep track of your questions, and then after our Q&A, you can choose a breakout room accordingly. So take notes, take close heed to what is said. Again, friendly note for our panelists, we don't have time for everyone to answer every question over the next 45 minutes, so we'll shoot for around 2 responses per question. Again, 2 minutes or so for each answer. So I'm really happy. I'm not going to be doing most of the talking today. I'm happy to turn things over to 2 different student moderators who are really grateful for their time. First up is Yazeed Al-Katteb, who is getting his master's in biotech from Krieger. Yazeed is also involved in Hopstone Capital, a new student-run equity-free investment org here on campus. Yazeed, feel free to throw a link there in the chat, and I'm looking forward to everyone hearing a little bit more from him in just a moment. Leana Silverberg is our other moderator. She's getting her dual MBA and PhD from Carey and Bloomberg. Has a wealth of startup experience in her own right, along with VC exposure and lots of work. And, perhaps nearest and dearest to my heart, she's the strategic advisor here at Fast Forward U. She works closely with students in our Fuel upper level accelerator and has been doing phenomenal work with that. I'm excited now to ask our special guests, our VC friends and investment folks, to introduce themselves. Again, 60 seconds or less, and sharing whatever alumni context that you think might be pertinent to the audience. And I'll go ahead and introduce them and tee them up. So first up, my pleasure to welcome Cheng, who's Managing Director at Ascension Ventures. Sean, you want to say a few words?
Thanks, Josh. I'll try to keep it to 60 seconds. I graduated in 2006 from Hopkins BME. And I was thinking about this right before the panel. It was a time before the Decker Quad. There was no gates around the AMRs, and Uni-Mini was still a thing. I don't think it's anymore. So great times. After Hopkins, I left and went on to do a PhD in England at Cambridge. And that was really, I think I was quite grateful for Hopkins giving the opportunity, as I got a scholarship the summer before to try before you buy. And from there, did a couple of years of management consulting out of London at BCG. and joined big corporate after that at Philips and set up the venture fund there, investing in digital health as well as medical devices. And I joined Ascension Ventures about 8 months ago. We represent about 460 acute care facilities across the US and 13 different health systems, and invest out of a fund that's about 285 million in across healthcare. So great to be here, and really good to see some familiar faces as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean. Next up is Lalita Hamilton, who is a venture capital fellow with Riptide Ventures. Lalita, take us away.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I am a 2010 graduate of the Carey Business School. I have a background in patent law, along with business science, finance, and policy. The way I came to venture capital is that for years I've worked with inventors and attorneys, entrepreneurs on their innovations, and I myself wanted to learn how to invest in startups, but had no idea how to do that. When I made the decision to start transitioning over to venture capital, I decided to start reaching out to Johns Hopkins alums, and I was able to connect with an alum by the name of Mike Leffer, who brought me in as a fellow first at Early Light Ventures and now at Riptide Ventures. He formed Riptide Ventures last year, and we are now going on our 17th investment, and we focus mainly on seed stage, B2B, and life science companies, including those that have come out of Johns Hopkins as well. I'm happy to be here, and anyone that wants to connect, reach out to me on LinkedIn or feel free to come to the chat room. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, and again, if you're just joining us, a reminder that all of our panelists will be in breakout rooms after the Q&A part. And panelists, do feel free to throw your LinkedIn information in the chat as you're comfortable. It is my very real pleasure to next introduce a good friend of the Fast Forward You ecosystem here, Margaret Roth, who is a Chief Operating Officer, the Chief Operating Officer at Squadra Ventures.
Hi, everyone. Margaret Falzon here. I, inspired by Sean, wanted to share that I'm a 2011 undergrad, 2012 School of Education master's grad. I am also a Whiting School dropout, but a Krieger School graduate. So I wound up majoring in Earth and Planetary Sciences, as well as postmodern American science fiction through the English department. So through, from being very connected to the Baltimore area and staying here after I graduated from college, I live in a Baltimore row house, as you can see from the brick behind me. I've stayed very involved with a whole variety of different tech things in the city. I worked in the nonprofit space. I was a co-founder of a venture-backed data analytics company, and have worked very closely with the Emerging Technology Center here in the city as well. In my role now at Squadra Ventures, I run all of our post-investment, all the things that we do after we've written a check into and made an investment into a company, as well as support and work on the investment committee. And so that's really about so one of the things that I'll highlight as we go through is like, once you've taken venture funding, what actually happens? What's that relationship about? And I'm excited to share that with you all and sort of get our other panelists' take on that pre and post investment experience as entrepreneurs as well.
Thanks, Margaret. Next up is Rachel Parlier, who is Vice President of City Light Ventures.
Hey, great to meet everyone. I am also a Hopkins alum, graduated in 2013 from Krieger. Undergrad, I was neuroscience major. I didn't realize Unimini was not a thing anymore, so that was news to me as well, that Sean mentioned. But yeah, after graduating, I was pre-med at Hopkins, thought I was going to take a couple of gap years and then go back to med school, and joined a management consulting firm for those gap years. Ended up really enjoying it, and so stayed there for a while. Then joined an early stage venture fund in the DC area that was focused on building out a focus on health. And so came on, spent spent about 3 years there helping them do that, and then went over and joined the team at CityLight. And we focus primarily on seed and Series A companies across healthcare, climate, and education. And we're an impact investing firm. So in addition to caring about financial outcomes, companies that we invest in also track KPIs associated with their impact and outcomes. And so that's part of our measures of success as well.
Perfect. And last but certainly not least, a little bit of a conquering hero, a good friend and former participant in numerous programming and pitch competitions here on campus is Aaron Shapiro. Aaron, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, glad to be here. I'm a 22 grad and was also not aware that Unimini was no longer there, so cannot confirm whether or not that's true. It was when I was there. But as Josh alluded to, I was involved in multiple capacities, both on the investor side through internships and then also on the entrepreneur side through my time at undergrad. On the entrepreneur side was building and scaling and building Graph Golf, where we're embedding electronics inside of a golf ball, and can elaborate more on that later as folks are interested. And then now currently at Stripes, a growth equity shop based out of New York City. We focus investments between both consumer and software. I have about $10 billion under management and investing out of a $1.7 billion fund where we invest in Series A to D companies at the growth stage. So invested in companies like Monday.com on the software side, and then also on running, if you folks know the shoes, and A24, the movie studio. So get our hands in a little bit of everything. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, for those in the audience, again, I hope that you are all taking note of the range of backgrounds, experiences, and focuses here. So keep that notepad handy and get your questions at the ready for our breakout rooms. I'm going to turn things over to our student moderators at this point. And Leana, why don't you take us away?
Awesome, thank you. So how we're going to be doing this is I'm going to mainly be focusing on the entrepreneurship questions, and Yazeed is going to be mainly focusing on the aspiring VC questions. So we have a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience, and the question kind of that I want to start off as is, what are kind of the main mistakes, but also the most impressive tactics that you've seen entrepreneurs do during their pitches? So if anybody wants to start us off, that would be great.
Well, I can't help it. I'm like a raise my hand first kind of person. So I'd also be remiss if I didn't share. So Squadra Ventures, we have about $150 million under management. We're now focusing on cyber and national security companies, and we invest pre-seed to Series A. Which I forgot to say in my intro, but one of the things that we think a lot about, and is really a big sort of myth or preconceived notion that entrepreneurs have, is that and we've built this whole culture around entrepreneurs has to justify their right or their validity or their ability to be in the room, and why. And there's this big question of like, why are you the team, the founder, to do this thing that you're trying to do? Which leads people to spend a whole lot of time in their conversation or in their pitch deck or any interaction they're having with a VC on really focusing on spending too much time on that justification and not enough time on the plan. So when you're taking VC dollars, the VC is, yes, you're investing in you, and there's this whole argument of like, is it the team, is it the idea, is it the market? That's the biggest thing. The thing that actually is what the dollars are going to is the plan that you're going to use to achieve the vision, to get the milestones you're trying to get in the next 18 to 24 months. And so I think people spend a lot of time, they spend 80% of their time on what the idea is and themselves, and 20% of time on the plan. And which is the like, oh, here's, let me show you, here's my deck, da, da, da. And our use of funds slide is one slide and a wand wave of like, and magically we're going to spend money and hire people, and we're going to then win. So it's really about how do you reverse that ratio and say, you know, who you are, the idea, and here's the plan that we're going to use to achieve. And that's this, I would say 20% on the idea and who you are, and 80% on what you're going to accomplish and what the relationship after the investment is going to be.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think Entrepreneurs have been kind of prepping themselves for the credibility side of things, but actually the plan and where that budget and where that money is going is so crucial. So thank you so much, Margaret. Does anybody else want to add to that? These are really useful.
The other piece I might add, so we might have a bit of a contrarian view on some of this, but just to give a range of perspectives, like we care a lot about the founding team, and I think feel like first and foremost, like especially at the early stage, like we're backing founders, and so that is really important to us. The piece that I also heard Margaret talking about that I think is really aligned with our view too is just like know your audience and know what level of understanding they're likely to be coming in with. If you can know a little bit about their investment perspective, I think that can really help. You might only have 30 minutes. And so you want to be using that in the way that's the most valuable. And so, certainly your point about speaking to the plan, I think is so important because we'll, all take calls with founders where I, tell them off the top that I really have a lot of conviction in the space and the market opportunity. And so let's kind of jump and talk about what they're doing. And, sometimes people don't take that guidance. And so I think just trying to use your time in the most effective way is really valuable.
For sure. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel and Margaret, for the insightful responses. You guys brushed upon this a little bit, but what are some other red flags that VCs usually look out for when they're meeting with entrepreneurs for the pitch presentations?
I'm gonna help kick that over to Sean, if that's okay, Sean. What are the red flags? What are the things that you don't want to see?
Yeah, I think there's probably two sides of this coin. One is maybe a lack of awareness in what type of fund you're pitching to, and the attributes. I think we as VCs, have to go raise money from our LPs, and usually there's a differentiated reason why. And so maybe going in and having that knowledge is very helpful, and it's very easy to tell if you don't. And the other maybe cheat would be to just ask us straight out in the initial conversation, the first 5 or 10 minutes. I just got off a pitch where the management team said, what are you looking for, right? And what's important to you? Is it financial returns? Is it the strategic outcomes from a clinical sense, or is there anything else? And that's something that I think both creates connection with the general partners as well as the other folks at the firm, but also gets you efficiently into a conversation versus a cold pitch.
Definitely. That's really insightful, I think, to take into consideration that you have to do your research as to which firms you're applying to before you are going to make a presentation. Maybe if Aaron, you could provide some insight, considering you've been on both sides of giving pitches.
Yeah, I've seen it from both sides. I'd say I'd echo everything that Sean just mentioned on the investor side. If it's always very clear when somebody doesn't do their homework before a conversation and they don't have a strong understanding of our prior investments, what stage we invest at, etc. So it's always helpful, and when entrepreneurs come into the call and has done their diligence and their homework. The other side of the coin, I think, like what I learned, let's say like 2018 till 2022, as we were constantly iterating on our pitch and talking to folks, was going through and doing that homework and being able to cater, kind of like Rachel was just saying, catering the pitch to the individual. If they had spent a ton of time in sports tech, I didn't have to educate them on the market. I should spend time on different areas, or go to market, stuff like that, where we're at with the product. And vice versa, like the other side of that coin is when it was somebody that maybe invested at the seed stage, so it was a good fit, but not necessarily in sports tech. Then it was more important to kind of outline the particular market opportunity that we were going after. So that's kind of how I would think about it.
Thank you.
And I would also like just to add one more thing. And what I've seen sometimes happen as well is not having an understanding of the market competition and how you stand out and how your actual company is unique, how you're coming in as a disruptor. And you talk about your company and you maybe reference the competition, but you don't basically specify, how are you unique? How are you novel? How are you coming in? How are you protecting yourself in terms of your intellectual property? Can these bigger companies come in and copy what you're doing and not having a grasp and understanding of the entire situation coming in?
Yeah, I think you all have really interesting views and perspectives, and with the uniqueness, every startup is different, but you also need to do your homework. And so on the lines of that, my next question is kind of, what are the essential considerations that entrepreneurs should keep in mind while identifying VC firms that align with their business goals? Because it's really a marriage. So what does that kind of look like, and how can they really kind of come up with a really important collaboration?
So I'm going to come in with something controversial. It is a lot easier to get to end a marriage in some cases than it is to end a relationship with people who have given you funding. So I'm going to try to I think we got this marriage, this making it. It is a deeply meaningful relationship, and it needs to be something that's built on trust and a way that you can collaborate together. But I think the marriage metaphor is this there's a lot of power positioning in it, and I'm just trying to be a voice that helps us stop using that language in VC. So and in entrepreneurship. So I'll throw that out there as a disclaimer on what the question I think we're really asking is how do you prepare for the understanding getting into the relationship that it is. And so I think the big thing, there's so and again, why the power positioning language of this is troubling is because it is so one-sided in a way that it's about how do I make myself as an entrepreneur suited or appealing to the VC, when it really is about getting to know each other from both sides and making sure that there is a path of things that you're going to collaborate on, or that you are very aligned with what they're trying to invest in, what they're, as Sean said, the LPs that your fund has, that do those LPs and who is actually where the dollars are coming align with what the business is and your vision for it as an entrepreneur. So it's really more about how do we create alignment as a joint, as a larger team, and how, and the what's the action item in this for entrepreneurs is you are just as much in the interviewer seat as the VC is. If VCs will sit there and they'll keep asking you questions and to get all the information that that they need, it's also on you to ask them questions, to interview them, to get the information that you want to know that makes sure it's aligned with your values and what your plan is. So it really needs your job is to get it to be a conversation. The VC's job is often to get the information out at the beginning, get the information, but how do you then transition that to being a collaboration?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, to understand both sides of things. Aaron, do you want to kind of take this as well, since you've kind of learned through the process?
Yeah, I'd say I generally agree with everything Margaret just went over. I think one thing I was really conscious of when taking money from folks at Graph was that I was very young with not a lot of experience at all. So I personally wanted somebody that was very active and was willing to help coach me and build me into an entrepreneur. And I think the only way you can really do that is, one, having mutual conversations alongside what exactly do you want to get out of this? We were very early stage. We didn't have a product. So it was making sure that we were exactly on the same page with this is a massive opportunity to go after, but it's going to take time. So make sure that they're okay with that and they're willing to put in the time to help coach you. And I think on the investor side, we encourage, through the first pieces of diligence, it does tend to be more us asking the questions. But as you get deeper into things, and especially as you're giving out term sheets and before any of that's signed, we encourage all of our entrepreneurs to back channel us, to talk to all of our founders. And we do that very actively, because if it's not a strong mutual relationship, if they don't want you, and we personally at Stripes tend to lead rounds and tend to take a seat on the board. And if there's not a really strong mutual partnership between the two, then things just get dirty and it doesn't build the best business. So I think that's how we look at things more generally.
Thanks, Aaron, for the response. It really sounds like having a strong relationship between the VC and the founders is really important for both sides. It shouldn't really feel like anyone's really taking advantage of anyone else in the situation. So at Hopkins, we have a lot of people from different backgrounds. For example, myself, I studied biotechnology. What are some tips you guys could give for someone who isn't necessarily in the field of finance that's looking to take their first steps into becoming a VC?
For me, my journey was very different. As I stated before, I'm a patent lawyer by trade. I started off investing in stocks and then in real estate, and then I wanted to move myself into investing in startups. So I think that if you want to move towards the VC stage, then I would highly suggest reaching out to alumni, just reaching out to alumni, reaching out to friends, connecting, even if blindly, just reaching out, saying, hey, I'm interested. Are you willing to connect with me? And then once you connect, then just go ahead and try to make that connection in terms of being able to set up a time to speak, even if it's only for 10 or 15 minutes. If you're gelling and you're vibing, then you could be on your way to what you're looking for.
Definitely. Thank you. I feel like a conversation could be worth more than just looking online for hours and hours.
Right.
Rachel, I have a question for you. In terms of moving up the ranks in the VC industry, what are some skills or maybe different things you could work on to develop to really go up the ladder of the VC industry?
Yeah, so maybe touching on a little bit from the previous question, and then I'll answer some of that as well. I think VC is sort of a little bit of a weird job where in some ways I think you want to be like doing VC to some extent before you're in VC. And that's sometimes what it takes folks to get hired. So as much as you can, build some of that network, like understand some of the VC fundamentals, and there's a lot of resources out there that can help, and then start to really build your own perspective, right? It's a little bit of kind of the VC version of what was touched on earlier of like, what's your unique wedge, right? And I think to get in VC and then to continue to sort of move up, like you want to have those unique perspectives of like, if it's healthcare or whatever, you pick the segment, right? Or, a direct to consumer company or B2B, like, why are you the person that is the expert in this area? And so I think starting to build some of that is really valuable. Fundamentally, like the VC progression, early on is sort of learning the ropes of, VC, like understanding kind of VC decision-making, all of like the financial fundamentals, and then kind of increasingly honing that skill set. So you're kind of taking a larger share of building up that thesis and kind of decision-making muscle. And then from there, it sort of moves to, typically doing more on the portfolio side. And so you're sitting on boards and you're working a lot more, closely with founders. And then, over time, even sort of managing the LP, right? Like our investor side of the business. And so there's definitely kind of different skill sets and things that evolve over time, and, exactly how you spend your time changes. But I think really starting to think about like, what would make you, from your experience, an investor, and like having some areas that you really, have your own take on, what makes them interesting from a venture perspective or investment perspective, I think is like a really great place to start for folks.
And I would just cut in on this and say, go work at a startup. There's nothing that builds empathy and rapport and understanding with founders like having had some actual experience when everything is on the line, even if it wasn't that you started a company. And just being in the stress and the anxiety of that is something you can't learn in consulting. You can't read about it in a book enough to actually understand it. And so, you want to get to the top of a pile with some funds, at least with ours. You worked at a startup a year, 2 years, that's 3 to 4 years of work experience relevant to VC. So go work at a startup.
Thank you. I think the lived experience is something that you definitely can't make up for. And I'm glad to say, like, even schools like Hopkins, we have organizations like Hopstone, which is giving students the opportunity to really get involved in the VC space without having too much on the line as students, where you're kind of allowed to make more mistakes.
And for our next question, I kind of want to put us in the minds of, you all have now found a startup that you really, really like. They pitched really well. They did everything that, worked, and you're excited about it. So what do you wish these entrepreneurs and these startups kind of knew about the due diligence process and negotiating term sheets?
I guess I could take that one. So the way that usually a fund setup is, you're one of few partners, and it's like the Hells Angels, right? You got to beat all the other ones up and get respect, and then you'll get, move up on the interests and ranks. So once a general partner takes a liking to your company, it's not a clear shot through to investment. At least the very balanced funds are not. And so they have to champion you internally. And so the mindset's really, how do I supply, this person who's, spending his or her, gracious time and championing me within the fund to put, this case in the best slide to, to move on to investment. So that's probably maybe one thing that I've learned over the last few years, at the partner level. And I think the diligence process beyond just, the check boxes, and, that you could probably Google, is the more that you could supply, I would say morsels of objective information for us, the easier it is for us to copy and paste into, the investment memo or whatever format that, the fund uses. We don't have to use that narrative, but we can certainly use those, objective morsels to build our case. And so I would encourage as much as that as possible. I think the best one I ran across recently was, we signed an NDA, and this is in the med tech sector, so you don't always need to sign NDAs, but we signed an NDA and got into the data room, and there was a 20-page Word document with every single data piece or text that we could take from, and that was a really, really easy write-up for me. So that's probably a bit more of a personal experience, but I do think that that's something that I would love.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. Does anyone want to add to that?
I would just add, in a similar experience, companies that have really put together whatever their customer discovery or customer validation or these sort of interviews that they've had and done really great people always ask for, like, what's the documentation of your product roadmap, or what is the documentation for your your technology stack. Having documentation about how you've made the decisions of what's going on, influencing your product from a customer or potential user standpoint, is really amazing documentation to be able to provide in the due diligence process, because that work, those conversations will have to get done. And it's much better. I would say it's much better for an entrepreneur when they were driving and collecting that data over time, and that sort of building that narrative and data set, rather than the VCs or the analysts, doing customer interviews and then having to sort of create that whole data set just from, hey, we're thinking about investing in this company. Can you talk to me for 15 minutes? It's not as rich of information, and as entrepreneurs, you're already having those conversations. So thinking about how you're capturing that, knowing that when you start raising funding, that's something that the VCs are going to want to look at deeply.
Thank you, Margaret. I think that ties in really well with what you were saying in the beginning about entrepreneurs having a plan, because I feel like if you're planning to maintain your data and really get customer feedback as you're going along, it probably makes it a lot easier to share the information with VCs as you have planned to pitch your company. So another question. Oh, if you want to hop it.
Okay, I want to add just one more thing. Since we're talking about preparing, since you mentioned preparing everything up front, the one thing that I see that is a crucial mistake is not thinking about the intellectual property and not planning for it and lining that up beforehand, before you even get to the pitching process and you're raising money. And I see that time and time again, just from talking to entrepreneurs, that a lot of them, particularly when it comes to innovations that require patents, they haven't even started the process of even filing to obtain them. And that can knock you out of funding easily.
Just to add to that, do you expect them, where do you kind of expect them within the IP side of things before they approach VCs?
I think that if their innovations require patents, I think they at least should have filed for their utility patents and started the patent process. It can take years to even go through the process. You may or may not get one, but it serves you no purpose to to be out here marketing and then put yourself into a situation where you're marketing to VCs, your innovation actually does require you to obtain protection. And if you wait too long, you may not even be able to obtain protection at all. And you leave yourself wide open to copycats and all sorts of situations.
Yeah, and that's definitely true for some types of innovations. It's not true in everything. So I think definitely, as you all certainly are looking more on the you're in medical devices, if you're in hardware, that IP becomes an important question. There's companies that we've invested in where that was never part of the conversation. So it is also very industry dependent and what your competitive landscape is already exists like.
Thank you. Sean, I have a question directed towards you. As a partner, how do you go about maintaining the relationships with your limited partners while also keeping the best interest of your portfolio companies in mind? Is there a lot of overlap there, or can there be sometimes some challenges or conflicts?
Yeah, so for our fund, because we're a strategic leaning fund, meaning that we invest on behalf of the strategic interests of our LPs in addition to the financial side, there's generally alignment, and the value transfer usually works in a way of the companies that we invest in ultimately become the vendors of these LPs who are health systems, and health systems are attractive as customers for companies to come and pitch to us, and so it's a great deal flow marketing machine. So relatively aligned. Where there's probably conflict is one of our LPs already has a vendor, and they arrived at that because of some relationship or legacy choice that wasn't really a financial one, and they kind of give you a terrible company to look at, and you have to kind of say no gracefully, both to the company as well as say why to your LP. And that skill set, I think, is one that's an art and honed over time. And maybe related to that is I would say on the founder management team side, being able to take no gracefully is a great skill that we respect as well. Usually we don't say no, we just say not now. And I've had a couple of founders who've got a bit more emotional about things, and that's certainly a less attractive future relationship for me versus ones that take the feedback and understand it, and then come back in a couple of years, and then we take another look and maybe invest as well.
So in just a moment here, we're going to go ahead and do some breakout rooms so that folks in the audience can ask more Q&A directly of the panel. But before we do that, Leana had a question that she wanted everybody on the panel to answer. So I'm just going to queue her up to put that out there.
Awesome. Yeah. So the kind of last question is really about just what are your words of encouragement for students and alumni founders and future investors kind of going into this space, both on the VC side and on the entrepreneurship side?
So I guess I'll go ahead and start off with the words of encouragement. I know that the economy is not in the best place now in terms of fundraising and in terms of what's going on in the stock market. But I just want to tell everyone to be encouraged, because somewhere sitting in the coffee shop is that person who's going to start the next Uber or Airbnb or Meta, and that the tide will turn. And just to be prepared for when it does, then you'll have your opportunity to be funded and to be successful. And you're not the only one out there who may or may not be concerned.
I could go next, and I'll get a little bit philosophical here. I would say it is daunting on both sides. I would say the founder side is even more daunting. And it looks like a very steep climb to Everest, to the top there. But I would focus on value creation. And what I mean by that is, focus on the customer and what they would pay for, and just dedicate your time on that, there's other ways to game the system, but they're not sustainable. And the very core thing that would last everything else is just being able to focus on value creation. I do think that, the US is the best, free market that we have. And if you have that value, the market will realize it, and they'll fund it, and they'll reward you for it. So don't give up is probably the short version of that.
Yeah, I think what I would say, I mean, it only takes one, right? Like you have to have a lot of these conversations usually to get funded, or if you're looking for a VC job to, get that next interview. But at the end of the day, like it really only takes one fund to say yes to you. And so I think it can sometimes feel discouraging, but you're really looking for that opportunity.
I would say don't do,
Go ahead.
all right, I'm in. Don't do work that you don't love. Don't work at a fund that you're not aligned with. Don't take a job because you think you need to add it to your resume, because then maybe somewhere down the line, somebody else will come in. Like, we live in a moment where there are so many different types of companies that are getting backed. There are so many different types of founders out there with great visions and great plans. And there's so many different types of unique and specialized funds that if you are trying to get into VC, like, find a place that you love, do work that you love. And as soon as you're not in love with it, it is time to go, and don't sit around and wait, because if you're out of love with it, you are not going to fall back in love with it. So it's like, and everyone on this call is too smart to be sitting doing something that they don't love. So that's my pitch.
Yeah, I'd add to that, having just gone through the process chances are most folks on this call haven't heard of anywhere that we're working today. And I think like the core message is there's places outside of A16Z and Sequoia and Tiger, like there's other venture shops out there. So I think generally, like, it helps to network with the Hopkins community. Like the VC Hopkins network is fairly small and tight knit. And I think everybody's looking to help people. So if you're looking to try to get onto the investor side, that's what I would propose you do. Just do your research, find places that might be unique, just do as much homework as you can on it. And then make sure you go into those calls very prepared, knowing what that individual invests in, companies that are in the portfolio stage, et cetera. And I think that all just leads to a better conversation and that individual being more likely to help you. And then on the entrepreneur side, I'd say it's very similar insight, in the sense that, like, find folks that have invested in similar companies, come out to them with a very targeted pitch, do what you can to get a warm intro, and chances are you're going to have a higher probability of success at the end of the day.
Nice. Thanks, everybody. And I hope for those in the audience taking notes that you're realizing what a range of perspectives and funds and opinions that we have here. So really a wealth of expertise and different approaches here for us to glean from.
We would like to thank all of our panelists for sharing all of their information with us in tonight's program. Please stay updated with other events at events.jhu.edu and the Hub. And as my collaborator said, don't forget to mark your calendars for Alumni Weekend, April 14th through 16th. We hope that you enjoyed this webinar, and we look forward to seeing you at a future event. Good evening.